The other favorite quote is when he says that he's going to consult the old men and him got together and they talked about the wampum belts, and they said that our records of our old men are as undying as your writings, but they do not deceive. That's my favorite quote that he has. But this is my second favorite quote, when he says that the great master of life gave us pipes and wampum for conveying information man to man. But here, the other part that's a contradiction in this sense is we all know that, or maybe we don't all know, but that the British, as part of this, when they actually talked about this as warmth, that the chief said, you promised that you would bring warmth to our country. And usually that means the blankets, as well as the cloth, the calico, the shroud, to make leggings, skirts, and shirts. So that's what they would use that for. But also the other, what was pointed out to me by my friend Darlene Johnson, was that it also meant shkure abo. They always brought that shkure abo to the council fire, and they would give the Anishinaabeg rum and whiskey after they dealt. It was supposed to be after they dealt, and they would say, I'll give you that, but when you depart for home, I'll put a keg, good suck, gabos tonje, gadojimani. I'm going to put one in your boat for your home, and when you get home, you share this with your old men. So here's what he says at 1829. Father, I have now finished speaking. My throat is quite parched with thirst. Do give me a drop of your milk to wet it. This wampum reaches to Penetanguishene. I will go there in future with my women and children in hopes that my life may be prolonged. He then delivered wampum and retired. So a lot of these speeches, that's what they would end with. My throat is parched. I've been talking a long time. Give me a bit of your milk. So again, this is again another metaphor for actually rum instead of milk. They didn't actually give milk. And the other, this is people, one of the kind of funny ways of looking at it. One of the chiefs before, I forget which chief actually said this, he says, we came to the fort and there was nothing for us to drink. I now ask you to squeeze your breasts together, great father, and squeeze out a bit of milk for me. So of course it's a metaphor, and people would actually look at these. You actually can't ask a man to squeeze his breasts together usually, but maybe they had a lot of estrogen back then. So then at this council, there was another chief from the south shore of Lake Superior named Mazai. And Mazai is a ling, that some of you know that kind of fish, a Mazai. And then he said the same thing. Father, it's not a new thing for me to make a road with wampum like this. My ancestors made a road to Montreal many years since. One end of this string is tied to my village at Chequamegon, a place in Lake Superior, and the other end I wish you tie at Penetanguishene to your new fire. I will go to see it every day, meaning year. Delivered wampum and took his seat. And then Shawanagonebi, an Ojibwe from the south shore of Lake Superior with a pipe in his hand said, my tribe is small, you have given us ammunition, but can we throw it at animals with our hands? And besides, we have no dishes to cook with. Father, I send this pipe to your new fire when I hope to see it again. I conclude by begging a drop of milk for my young men, presented the pipe and took his seat. So again, what I mentioned earlier, that these guys, they actually gave a pipe to the commanding officer who had a scribe, a secretary that wrote down these, and then they would actually keep track of all these different pipes and strings. And I know they wrote of Sir William Johnson's place in 1764, that if you can imagine, let's say this is his main living hall, and all along the hall, he actually had all these pipes on the wall, and he had like little hangers there. So he had all these pipes, and then he had a drawer, and inside the drawer were all these wampum belts and strings. And then within those chests as well, he would keep little notes, and he would put to keep track of which pipe came from who and which belt came from who and what it meant. So that's how William Johnson, who was the first minister of British North America, superintendent, I should say, for British North America. Yeah, that's how he kept track of things. So I've never come across it saying that at Drummond Island was the same thing, or at St. Joseph's Island, or at Michilimackinac, or at Mantuaning. But I imagine it was so, because you see all these different chiefs coming in, and they're bringing pipes, and they're giving it to the commanding officer. One of the things I'm researching, but I haven't finished yet, is after they leave Drummond Island, there's a bit of a scandal because they're saying, the headquarters says, where are all these pipes? Where are these wampum strings? And then one Indian agent says of the clerk, the storekeeper, John Askin, took them. And then John Askin says, no, it was the Indian agent who took them. So what I'm trying to work at now is to find out what happened to all these pipes that were given at Drummond Island, because there was the headquarters actually asked for them to be kept because they know that this is part of the pledge. So this is basically what I've been sharing with you, that from 1764 to 1798, the presents were delivered at Michilimackinac. And there was a wampum belt given to the Odawa in 1798, and it was that they made a new road from Michilimackinac to St. Joseph's Island. That's what that belt is purported to do. And then at St. Joseph's Island, the presents are delivered 1798 to 1812, and then Fort Michilimackinac 1812 to 1815, Drummond Island 1816 to 1828, and then St. Joseph's Island 1829, and those are the speeches, parts of the speeches that I read to you. I didn't bother reading the Menominee ones. But what I wanted to emphasize is that when the British Council fire was at Drummond Island or Michilimackinac or St. Joseph's Island, then we had the Menominee and Ho-Chunk, and even the Sauk and Fox came up. So the Sauk and Fox are from lower Wisconsin, over by Chicago area, on the west side, southwest side of Lake Michigan. The famous chief Black Hawk had come up to Drummond Island a number of times, and he brought wampum belts and he actually wanted the British to go back to war against the Americans. And some of you may know that actually Black Hawk was one of the last few to have a resistance against the Chimokmanak in the 1830s. So he came up to actually get more assistance, but he was denied. Anyway, so all these different nations were coming up to Drummond Island as part of the Western Confederacy and as allies to the British. So the other thing that I wanted to point out is I didn't have time to do this, but these, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, when we actually look at these are the documentation of these speeches. And so sometimes you had scribes who were new, and when they were new scribes, they would write down everything. They would write down a lot more. But then as they were more seasoned, sometimes what they would do, especially in the southern parts, they would say the usual ceremonies. So they wouldn't bother recording the presentation of wampum strings or the presentation of the pipe. So, but here, later on, what happens here, in 1829, the secretary actually writes who delivered a pipe, who delivered a string of wampum, and then after that, I haven't found any council proceedings for 1830 or to 1836, any speeches delivered. But that seems to be one of the last few times where there's all these different nations come together and they all bring different pipes and they bring strings of wampum and they deposit them with the commanding officer at the garrison. So it shows a shift in diplomacy, because then after that, the chiefs come to the council fire, but they actually stop bringing wampum strings and they stop bringing pipes per se. And so this kind of diminishes after a while, which is another interesting thing to note. So Penetanguishene, 1830 to 1835, and I put a star there because I'm not 100% there on that. and I don't want to misinform you. Then at Mantuaning, of course, the Mantuaning Treaty of 1836, and then that's when the treaty happens there in 1836, and that's when they make the council fire at Mantuaning, and till 1854. So some say that the last delivery of presents was 1854, but they did bring blankets later, so some could argue that there were presents extended later, but the presents in its fullest form were actually all kinds of different cloth, ammunition, ball, shot, net, thread, and as well as tobacco. The other thing I forgot to mention, that at each of these councils, the British not only brought rum, but they actually brought tobacco all the time. And they actually fed everyone too. So what I didn't show were the provisions and the rum. So I have the different documentation when they actually showed how many pounds of rations they brought and how many kegs of rum they brought to some of these as well as the number of cloth and the number of guns and the number of rifles and the number of kettles and even combs and gorgets and medals and all this other stuff. So the other interesting thing, like I was asked to talk about what happened between 1812 and 1850. Here in 1832, Asants and Yellowhead, Meskwaki is the chief of the Narrows, and he's the Caribou clan. And Asants is Nagik. And so they wanted to make this, before Mantuaning happened, this model community that was being made was at Coldwater. And some of you may have heard of this Coldwater because of the recent land claim that was done there. Incidentally, I told my chief and council that jigging should be part of that. And the reason being is Chief Deboski was there, and actually Chief Ashagashi is the one that actually signed that as well. So we should have got a big check too. So here in 1832, this is the Indian agent reporting, Thomas Gummersall Anderson. The Indians of this place and the Narrows, having invited the Odawas from Penetanguishene to a council, they assembled this day in one of the new buildings. The subject of the meeting was to express a mutual desire that their long-established friendship should remain undisturbed. Yellowhead and John Asants earnestly expressed their wishes that they, the Odawas, would come and reside with them, that they would next year bring with them the great wampum delivered into their care at Niagara by Sir William Johnson. And in conclusion, Yellowhead told them if any of his people should be killed by the Mohawks, of which he was fearful, he trusted they would accept this invitation to raise the hatchet against them. So this is 1832, and they're still talking about fearful of the Nottawick at that point in time. And in a different talk about this dish with one spoon, then I mentioned Yellowhead talking about the Caughnawagas coming up and what he says, emptying the dish. So, but that's a different. So then the following year, he reports again, Chiefs Yellowhead and John Asants have this day been with me and have requested me to make a requisition on an account of their land payments for money to purchase provisions for Indians whom they intended to invite to be present when the Odawas will come down in July with their great wampum belt, mentioned in my letter of June last. On inquiry, I found it was the intention to invite chiefs from all the different bands in the province and even those of Lower Canada in order to renew the ties of friendship entered into by Sir William Johnson, of which the belt now in possession of the Odawas was given as a pledge. So again, the main point is that Asants and Meskwaki actually wanted to make this friendship and strengthen this confederacy and extend it all the way to Lower Canada and all the way out west to bring all that Western Confederacy back together again. And what they actually hoped was to strengthen their community and build up their community at Coldwater in order to do this. So this is these are excerpts from speeches that were held at Coldwater as well. So Coldwater what happens with this Potawatomi Anishinaabeg, they call them, and that's the Drummond Island band. They leave Drummond Island in 1828 and they go to Penetanguishene, and then they go and live at Coldwater at the invitation of Essence. Essence asks them to come and live with them. So they go and live there as well, this band. And they end up asking them to live with them, and they have a council. And in these different councils, they express the concerns of their community. So at this 1833, here he says, Assange says, "Father, a great many of my friends and countrymen come here to see how I get on. When they arrive here, they see that I am poor and have nothing. They go home and say that John Assange had an empty hand. Father, last fall, 2 families of the Odawas came here. They wintered here, and this spring, seeing that I was poor, they went away and left me. Father, do you think that if I had the management of anything, my young men would waste what was given to us? When we have even a little dog, we love it and take care of it, and so we should if cattle were given to us. Father, if I was master of anything, I could take care of it, and it would not be wasted. I have 3 young men who are able to write and take care of things. Formerly it was not the case, but now they know better." So here he's saying basically they want the management of their affairs. But what was happening there at Coldwater was they were getting Wemtagojik and Jaganashuk to take care of matters. And there was a lot of internal strife there, and things just weren't going well, and ultimately that community failed as a result. But what he's actually saying is here, let us take care of this. We can do it if you'd get out of the way and quit meddling, is basically what he's saying. So here, Debaske and his band, the Potawatomi band, moved down there. And he says, Debaske chief, but the speaker was Taugewinene. And why, again, I'm emphasizing this is Taugewinene is the speaker. He's not the chief of this band. So, Father, bad reports get to York about us, and we do not like it. For we only wish to do that which is good and work peaceably on our lands. When things do not go on smoothly among ourselves, we do not wish that every trifle should be referred to the governor. We could easily settle those trifles among ourselves. Father, we that come from above receive no annual payments, not even a copper, while our neighbors receive payments annually. Those neighbors say that they are poor, but they are not so. So this is the Potawatomi band. The original chief at the time was Ashaugeshi as well as Nibalcom. But then Nibalcom died, Chief Nibalcom died, and then he was succeeded by his son Debaske. But in this council, Taugewinene became the speaker. So these are actual watercolors done by a fellow named Titus Ware. And he did these watercolors, and he did a visit at Coldwater, and this is what they were wearing. And you see in the background there's wigwams that were made. And then up here, I mean, Nasoogan, they call these Nasoogan, a teepee. And then here, the actual wigwams that were made by the British for them. So all this area, there's a lot of activity going on. But like I said, the main sources that we have are government reports. And then also missionary reports. So what I said at the beginning is you have to be aware that the bias is then that they're going to record when the chiefs wanted Christianity or asked for it. And then, but what did that really mean in that sense as well? So you have to look at this whole thing that I made here. By the time I'm done, I actually could have made a report here to say that we all wanted to be Christian. By just pulling out all these different reports, I could have really emphasized that. And then on the other side, what I tried to do is temper it by showing also that the chiefs were actually talking about land and doing things for themselves and getting themselves empowered for a different reality that they were facing. So that's the other part that you can do. So what I expect is that the government is going to look at these same sources, and they're going to make it out to be that we wanted Christianity more. So a number of you came up to me during the break and you wanted a copy of this. And I told a number of you that I already put it on this laptop here, and that it's on Patricia's laptop, but that you should, I think we got to exercise some caution, because we're still in court against the Ontario government. And so I was telling Angus here that I thought this was going to be live streamed, and I was going to say, don't live stream it. You can record it for posterity, but don't live stream it now, because the Ontario government is still at large, basically, and we don't really want to give them the ammunition, basically, and we want. So if you want copies, I'm all right with it, but I'm leaving it to Angus here and Patricia to try and control who gets it, and we don't really want it going all the way out.
Can you send it to Diane or Dave and Marty Solicitor, client privilege on the front, and not distribute it, except for the parties that are here to protect it?
Yes, we can do that, Chief.
Okay. So like a number of you have asked for this, and a number of you, the other thing that we're trying to balance out here is that we want our young people in school to learn this as well. So there's a bit of a balancing act. Sometimes we don't, and we know how long it takes to the court to do anything. So you have to decide as chiefs yourself, do you want your young people to learn this now? Or do you want them to wait till the end of the court case, which we don't know when that actually could happen. So my thinking is that you have the discretion. I've made this, I pulled it together, and I considered that Mom was the one that asked me to do this. So that's why I'm giving it to the CAO of that, and that then they can do what they want with that. And I was talking to the videographer here, your AV guy, and I said the other thing that would be of concern is that I don't actually have the permissions for all these images. So if you turned around and tried to use this and sell it, you don't have the copyright or the permission to actually say, well, that image belongs to the Jesuit archives in Montreal. So you can't actually turn around and crank this out anyway. Or you could if you want to get sued. But so there's a lot more things just pulling this together. Anyway, 1832, that they're at Penetang, this was Anderson and Elliott, who was a minister, and they did a tour in 1835. But Anderson earlier had reported that 2 Odawa families were cultivating land, and more families were going to join on Manitoulin. And then in 1833, they met the Potognacy band on Manitoulin also. And that the Potognacy band and Odawa had built 3 log cabins that were covered with cedar bark, with a 4th under construction. One of the houses was used as a chapel where there's a parade of crosses and images. So these guys, the Potognacy and the Odawa, actually were embracing Roman Catholicism at that time. This is an image of that. But you see, they've constructed this lodge, but in there is all this religious imagery, but off to the side are those Nasoganak, the teepees. This was also a documentation of the gathering for presents. So, of course, one of the things is that one of the most vocal and eloquent speakers or chiefs that we had is Jagua Kons. So some of you will be here like, well, how come you didn't talk about Giok Kons? Or how come you didn't talk about Biabada Sung? And it's because they continued, it looks like they more or less continued their way of life in the bush, living their Anishinaabe way, and they didn't bother petitioning so much as Jagua Kons did, and they didn't have an Anglican minister to write down those petitions, nor did they have Aptonzik Jibige. They didn't have the Métis to write down their thoughts and have a secretary to do that for them. So he did. So this is from the same talk. And like I said, that's why I pulled these two together, but when he did the actual talk, they're actually connected more. But I wanted to show you that what could actually be done with these speeches is you could just pull out all this religious stuff and ignore the land part. So I imagine that let's say the government says, oh, all he really talked about in May 1835 is that he wanted religion and education, and we provided it, therefore our treaty obligations to you are done. But actually what he said was, my father, those houses you see along the beach and the dwellings therein were never allowed by me or by my fathers to have built or to clear the little land they have. So people are starting to settle along St. Mary's River, and he's saying they never asked us for permission, so they don't actually have the right to be there. My father, our place is becoming like a meadow, for they have destroyed all the good timber about the place. I held a council with them last fall, meaning the ones that are cutting the timber, telling them that they must pay attention to what I say, but they do not. They will not pay attention. So then he actually asked the governor to actually police his people better. And so what I didn't mention here is that in that actual covenant chain wampum belt, they actually promised to protect us. And when they actually said that they're going to protect us, they said that, and this is also in the Royal Proclamation, that they would, when they're going to protect us, they're protecting us from themselves. And of course, now we know that they didn't do a very good job of that, but that was what the original intent was, that they were going to protect us against themselves. But here is an instance where they actually they failed to do that. But here in the same discourse, he says, it is now 3 years since my minister has reached me, he who is trying to save my soul, and it is now 2 years since I left off drinking, that mixture you, my father, had invented, and the desire of my heart is that all my brethren, the Indians, would know their great creator. So here he's actually saying that he wants all the Anishinaabeg to adopt Christianity. My desire and greatest wish is to see all the Indians leave off drink. This is which is destroying us so much. And when I awake and I'm allowed to step out of the place where I rest my body, the first thing I see is the glass to the mouth, or persons fighting, or those who are lying about the roads here in this, my village. So he's already reporting that in 1835 there's an alcohol problem, and he wants help in curbing that. And actually, I didn't show that many of these speeches, they're actually asking for that rum when they leave the post, but later on they actually start saying, we don't want them to bring whiskey to our communities. So they said, we want assistance in actually arresting whiskey peddlers, and we don't want that to be brought into our community. And so here, he ended up taking Christianity, and that actually assisted him. It sounds like it assisted him in becoming sober. And then, so that's what he said, I need assistance in making all of us sober, because drink is actually destroying our community. And of course now, instead of this, you could actually put drugs. And in Chiging, just this past weekend, we had a shooting. And it was, there was a shooting on our reserve, and some say it was due to drugs. So there's all these different jimshkikke, bijigade shkunaganing. So these different intoxicants are being brought into our communities, and they're creating problems. And this is a long-standing issue, and that's what I'm trying to show is that it isn't just today. So I don't have to tell you all, you all know this, that the Anishinaabe king doesn't really recognize the border. But in practicality terms, crossing the border still is an issue. But also, Jacques Cons wrote and also spoke in council a number of times that after the War of 1812, he was actually living on what we would now call Chumokwan King, the American side. And he says that he was promised by Askin that you served us well, now you choose land on your side, on the Canadian side, and you'll never be poor. You'll always be well off, he says. And then, of course, what ended up happening in the 1830s is the Andrew Jackson regime took power, and one of their main policies was removal. To remove all the tribes west of the Mississippi to make room for American expansionism and, of course, the idea of manifest destiny, that white is right and that it's their God-given right to own all the land, and that anybody else that's in their way doesn't have the God-given right to do that. So this sets the backdrop for the Manitoulin Treaty of 1836. Incidentally, Blaine Bellow used to make me laugh because he'd always get mad at me and he'd say, "That ain't a treaty, that's a goddamn letter, Alan." Because it starts off, it says, "My children," and it goes on and he says, "It's not a treaty, it's a letter." Anyway, the chiefs looked at it as a treaty. And the other thing about that treaty is actually Bondhead didn't come there and announce beforehand to say that he was going to enter into treaty. He was actually commissioned to go there to say that the presents are going to end. But when he got there, things changed. So the Americans enter into treaty with the Anishinaabeg, who are living on the American side in 1836, and the Odawa and the Ojibwe thought they had secured their reserves forever. But then that treaty went to the Senate, and then the Senate unilaterally imposed or introduced a clause, a removal clause, or a clause that said that at the end of 5 years, this is subject to review, and we could relinquish those reserves and move the people west. So this is the backdrop for the Odawa living at L'Arbre Croche, as well as some of the Ojibwe living around Michilimackinac. So then Bondhead is hired. He's actually hired in England because he did a good job with reforming and cutting the budget over there for welfare. So they said, "Well, you'll now be hired, and your job is to cut the budget, reduce the budget at Indian Affairs." So when he was assigned that, he said, "Okay, one of the biggest expenses are these Indian presents. I'll go up to Manitoulin in the summer, and I'll tell them that these presents are going to be curtailed year after year until the point that they're no longer given at all." So he shows up, and then Jean-Baptiste Signac is there, and Signac has the belts. And then Signac reads the wampum belts to Bondhead, and Bondhead is really impressed with them, and he says, "Well, let's make a treaty. And then let's set aside this island and all the islands around for a refuge for the Anishinaabeg." And he says that basically the Coldwater experiment, it was a failure because they were too close to Jagannashuk. If we isolate the Anishinaabeg further, keep them away from Jagannashuk, the plan will work. That's what Bondhead thought. So this is what Signac had said. "My children, I clothe your land. You see that wampum before me, the body of my words, and this, the spirit of my words shall remain. It shall never be removed. The Indians being my adopted children, their life shall never sink in poverty." So I was talking to Ingigano na Bejik Nadawe, Rick Hill Jinkaza, Nadawe Awe. I was talking to Rick Hill, a fellow who's very learned about his traditions, Haudenosaunee traditions and wampum traditions. And he says what his old people told him is that whenever they talked over wampum, that all those words would go into that belt. So why I like this quote and why I brought it to your attention is that the way he talks about that belt, he says, "the body of my words." And he says, "In this, the spirit of my words will remain." So that's why we got to find this original wampum belt. All those times that the chiefs talked of those belts, over those belts, what the Haudenosaunee believe, and it sounds like what the Anishinaabe believe, is that a part of that, the spirit of those words actually went in there, physically into that belt, or spiritually into that belt. So I've heard a number of times One, Paul Williams, the lawyer, was the first one who told me about this belt. And actually told me later on that when he started doing research about this belt, that he was told that the last chief to have had it was Louis Odogojuan from Wikwemkong. And he said that it was buried with him. I can't believe they would bury it, but that was what he was told. And then he said the second one was that this belt was actually in the Queen's Hotel in Mantuaning in a big coffee table, a glass coffee table in the lobby. I can believe that. And that this wampum belt was in that hotel, but that hotel burnt down. And so it might have perished in a fire. That's the second thing that might have happened to these belts. The third story is that actually somebody is still keeping it. And they said that they'll bring it out when the time is right. So 2014, I thought was the 250th anniversary. I thought maybe that's the right time to bring it out, but apparently it wasn't. So if some family still has it, they've decided not to bring it out, and they'll bring it out when it's needed. That's the third story. The fourth story I heard was that a curator at the Siganak Museum in Mantuaning, he had told me that he had actually seen the belt in a museum in Chicago. So I said, oh, the Field Museum. And he said, no, it wasn't the Field Museum. It was one of these rinky-dink museums off in the suburbs. And I said, well, which museum was it? Oh, I forget, Gikada. Gigin Wishke or Jaganashish. Anyway, maybe he really forgot. Anyway, he wouldn't tell me what the actual museum was where he saw that. And I thought, he keeps calling it a Siganak's belt, and he calls it the Siganak Museum in the Siganak Township. So I thought myself, my thinking is he wants that belt to go back to that museum in the Jaganash town of Mantuaning, instead of the Anishinaabe repatriating that as our document for this treaty. So, as you know, the first lines of that is, my children, 70 snow seasons have now passed away since we met in council at the Crooked Place, Niagara, at which time and place your great father, the king, and the Indians of North America tied their hands together by the wampum of friendship. As far as I know, that's the only treaty that refers to that original treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Western Confederacy, and the British. And some of you may know that the family, the descendants of Bond Head had put a number of items up for auction at Sotheby's. I think I'm saying that right, Sotheby's. And one of them was this Calumet pipe, and another was a pouch, and then a string of wampum, and then also some documents, but the documents were from what would be now called the Chippewa of the Thames. So as far as I know, last I heard, Wikwemkong is the one that are the ones that purchased this with assistance from the Heritage Canada, but it's supposed to be kept at the Royal Ontario Museum. So they were going to auction it off at Sotheby's, but then the family heard that the bands wanted to buy this, repatriate it, and then so they took it off the auction block, and it's supposed to have been just a one-way transfer instead of a highest bid wins. But they still wanted to get money off it. So that pipe may have been the one that was given at Mantuaning in 1836, but it also may have been given elsewhere. We're not exactly sure, because he doesn't actually say this pipe was given to me by the Anishinaabeg at Mantuaning, because he also went down to the Huron area country, and they may have given him a pipe as well. So here's the first page of the treaty. Jean-Baptiste Siganak can sign his name, so he signed his own name. And same with his son, Irawishkosh, could sign his name. And Gimewan use his totem. That's a bear. Somebody wrote in there bear, so I know it's a bear. Whereas before, if I just looked at the document, I would have thought it was a buffalo. And then Mokmanish, I thought Mokmanish wrote his own name, but it actually, you look at the handwriting, and you see that it's actually Thomas Anderson's handwriting. And he put an X. So that's the interesting thing, tying this to Robinson Huron Treaty, because all the chiefs of the Robinson Huron Treaty signed that treaty document with an X. And here, this Mokmanish is the only one that signs this with an X. All the other chiefs sign with their totem. So I was reading one of the documents, and the late Fred Pine had said that the reason they would use an X meant that it isn't fully, the document, the contract isn't closed. It isn't a closed, open and shut case. It's an open, that they're supposed to add more on to that. And Fred Pine made it sound like in that little speech that it was actually referring to the escalator clause, that it's supposed to be adjusted from time to time and that it's supposed to be increased. So these are the chiefs that signed this. Kchamokman, Besan, Adwish, Bemasge, Nanam Debe, Musaneko, those are all Odawa chiefs. And then Giwak Kons is the Teslan chief. Shawanaswe is what we now call Whitefish River chief. Espanol is from Zgamak. And then Snake is from Serpent River. And then Badaswe from Mississauga. Bem Ganeshkang from Magnetawan. And then We Gimalke from French River. So that's a Beaver clan, Caribou clan, Eagle clan. It says squirrel. And then here it says cock. And then here it says pike. And then here it says crane. And then fork stick, eagle, fork stick, snake, moose head. These are pictures, sketches, and paintings of the chiefs that signed this. This is Gimewan Mokmanish. It's listed as Esban, but he's also known as Bemasge, Shawanaswe, Erewishkosh, and his father Jean-Baptiste Siganak. So here's where they were from. And I'd already said this, but here's their totems as well, where the people that signed that treaty of alliance, but also that treaty to set aside all the islands and Manitoulin Island as a refuge for the Anishinaabeg. So those Odawa were mainly from what they call Larber-Crosh, but that's almost like saying you're from Wiki. And then when people from Wiki meet each other, they either say they're from Buzwa or Tuklok or Wikwem Konsing or Doganing, or you get the idea. So it's the same thing here with Larber-Crosh. It's either Cross Village or Optoing or Goodhart. So this is Anna Jameson Brownell, was a travel writer, and she came to Canada in 1837, and then she was supposed to be married to an arranged marriage, but she was dissatisfied with her husband, and she was a travel writer. So she ended up getting on the steamboat and came up to Michilimackinac, and then the Sioux, and then came to Manitoulin. But she was also an artist, and here she painted some of the Anishinaabeg dancing. And at that time, she recorded that some were Menominee that were there at Manitoulin, Manitowoc. So some Menominee actually came to Manitowoc as well back then. But here they're doing their war dance. So in 1837, we were still doing these ceremonies. And then what I wanted to mention later on, what ends up happening at these gatherings is people know it's a gathering, that you're going to get all these Anishinaabeg there. So artists came like Paul Kane and this Anna Jameson, and that's where the previous paintings that I showed you were done in 1845, the majority of them. But also missionaries would come there. So Anglicans would set up service here, Roman Catholics would set up service here, Midday would set up service here, Wabanowin would set up service there. So we'd have all these different congregations basically. I know people would get mad that I said the Midaywan was a congregation, but anyway, and the Wabanowin. But you'd have all these different services going on at the same time, and people were competing for their the Ben Dagazuin, their belonging, their membership, I should say. Anyway, so we still did this. So this was a flag that we had to reconstruct this flag. And, but it was, Anna Jameson described this in 1837, that Samuel Peters Jarvis, who was the superintendent of Indian Affairs, had come up, and he said that Bondhead was supposed to come back up, and he was going to deliver this flag to the chief, and who he wanted to instill as the Grand Chief. So he says, she wrote down the speech. Children, your great father, the Lieutenant Governor, as a token of the above declaration, transmits to the Indians a silk flag, which represents the British Empire. Within this flag and immediately under the symbol of the British crown are delineated a lion and a beaver, by which is designated that British people and the Indians, the former being represented by the lion and the latter by the beaver, are and will be alike regarded by their sovereign, so long as their figures are imprinted on British flag, or in other words, so long as they continue to inhabit the British Empire. Children, this flag is now yours, but it is necessary that some one tribe should take charge of it, in order that it may be exhibited in this island on all occasions when your great father either visits or bestows presents on his red children. Choose therefore from among you the tribe to which you are willing to entrust it for safekeeping, and remember to have it with you when we next meet again at this place. She then recorded that Jaguar Cons then came forward and made a long and emphatic speech, from which I gathered that he and his tribe requested that the principal council fire might be transferred to St. Mary's River, and objected to a residence on Manitoulin Island. After him spoke two other chiefs, who signified their entire acquiescence in what their great father had advised, and declared themselves satisfied to reside on Manitoulin. After some deliberation among themselves, the custody of the flag was consigned to the Odawa tribe then residing on the island, and to their principal chief, who came forward and received it with great ceremony. There was another distribution of extra presents, medals, silver gorgets, and amulets to some of the chiefs and relatives of chiefs whose entire conduct was particularly approved. What I forgot to do was to show, we redesigned this flag, Crystal Migwans and I. Instead of, what I didn't like is that we're under the crown there. So we made another flag, and we showed that in 2016. Anyway, that flag, I'll show you a picture later, and you'll see that flag flying over when they gather for presents. And so what Xinghua Kons wanted to do at that time is he wanted the council fire, instead of at Mantuaning, he wanted it to be put back at St. Joseph's Island. So he was the one and he advocated that in 1829, that the council fire stay there, but it moved to Penetanguishene, and he says that's too far for all your children, especially the ones that come from the west. And then when they moved it to Manitoulin, he says, no, it should belong back at your old council fire. And then he recited in 1839, he recited again that Covenant Chain Treaty. And he talked about the log that was placed there, and the tree that was erected, and the council fire that was to burn eternally, and that the choice pieces of wood that would be put aside for that fire, and that the mat that was laying spread there for the chiefs to repose and the Englishmen to repose. So here, this again is Jaguar Cons. So some say his totem was a Jijok, but here you see he signs this one, and he puts Plover, the totem of the band at the Sioux, and it says Jichi Shkwen, it looks like. And that's the word for killdeer, jichi shkwen. And it means his head goes back and forth, kind of like jichi boxin is a rocking chair, it goes back and forth. Jichi kaje gun is a poker or a stoker for your fire. And that jichi means going back and forth. That's what that. And then kwen, when you say giu shkwe, you're dizzy, your head's going around in a circle. Gyushkwebi, your head's going around in circles because of drink. That's what that means. And in Deo Kwe, you got a headache. So that Kwe means, refers to your head as well. So in 1838, now my father, you are not ignorant of the promises made to me by the one that I visited at Toronto, Sir John Colborne. It is now 6 years since those promises were made to me and since I adopted your religion. You told me showing your house at the same time that house of a similar kind would be made for me where I could in comfort follow your religion. So again, this idea of adopting a new way of life, and part of it was tied to religion, education, but also housing. Then again, later the following year, some years since I waited on Sir John Colborne to ask him to erect for me houses. Many heathen Indians would, if they saw me and my band in good houses, would be induced to give up their wandering habits and come and reside with us and pray with us, should the like be done for them. So again, if you remember earlier, I was talking about John Assance's efforts to make a community at Coldwater, and to say that if he had built us these houses and the heathen Indians that come for their presence at Penetanguishene, they saw how we were living, they would then stay with us. And if they stayed with us, then our community would be bigger. So that's what these chiefs are trying to do, is to strengthen their community, get more members, bring them on board. And one of the chiefs, later on, what he describes is, he says that our fire is burning low, but if we brought all of our scattered members together, it would throw off a great light. So one of the things that we really have to look at, again, this goes back to metaphors, and when we talk about fire, I didn't really want to get too much into this, but it's actually a really beautiful metaphor when you look at some of these speeches, how they talk about our nation, our spirit, our communities, and they use that, and our religion. They actually talk about it as a fire. This is Mokmanish, and this is a sketch that was done by that Anna Jameson Brownell. And he says, many years ago, this is in 1839, this is another well-documented council at Manitowoc. So similarly to how it was in 1829 at St. Joseph's Island, the next well-documented one is 1839 at Manitowoc. Many years ago, you promised us that the widows and orphans of our warriors should become your pensioners, that those who were struck by the shot of the enemy should, if chiefs, receive $100 a year, the others 50. I was one of those. Father, I'm old and infirm. There are not many steps between me and the grave. Grant us all our pensions and arrears, and we may then build our houses. So he was, like I said, showed you earlier, this is the same chief who was given that sword, the ivory-hilted sword. And he was wounded in a battle on the Wabash River, bullet to the leg, and he couldn't walk. Anyway, he still never got his pension, and he was told that if he were a chief, it were 100, if a warrior, $50. So what I wanted to point out is that his totem is that was sea, and was sea is that brown bullhead. It's a small catfish. The channel catfish is monomake, different kind of fish. And here he had two names, Babamadabi and Mokmanish. So this is the one that signed that treaty with an X, and this is the one that I believe, but they said it was given to an unknown Odawa chief. That flag, I believe it's this one who was given that flag. And he actually is listed as one of the keepers of the wampum belt, the 1764, as well as the 24 Nations belt in 1786. He's one of the ones that's a wampum keeper. So that's why I think he's the one who gets the flag after. So here, this is still the same council, and this is Wagimalke. Although they spelled it as Wagimal King, but Wagimal Ke, and Gimal Ke is making a chief. Wagimal Ket, the one who makes a chief. And then he's Beaver Clan. So you see that at the bottom there? It looks like a snapping turtle, but they wrote there Beaver. And if you look at these other documents, you'll see that along the French River, that's where the Mi'kmaq people were, that they were called before they got called Ojibwe. They were called the Mi'kmaq, and that means beaver people. Father, you advise me to abandon the mode of life of the Indian and to seek the consolation of religion and the comforts of civilized life. I have followed your advice and I am well. No fire water now touches my lips. You have recommended to us to leave off our habits and mode of life and settle all together and cultivate the land. Father, we are willing, but to do it, we must have tools, and we ask them from you. Father, ask our great Father in Toronto to give us some axes and hoes, merely all we require. Also nets. I ask also for our women that they may fish while we're tilling the land.